Today's Gospel reading comes from St. Mark's Gospel, chapter 1. The man with the unclean spirit cried out, "What do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" This Gospel reading, this story in the Gospel, is like all the readings used in Epiphany. It's about Jesus revealing himself in signs to show those around him just who he is. I suppose in a way it's like leading by example. It's no good telling people that you are a brilliant surgeon or cook. The best way to get the message over is quite simply to show them and others just what you can do. There's a brilliant song in My Fair Lady, which Eliza Doolittle sings after she's been wooed in words by Freddie Ainsford Hill. She suddenly turns on him and sings, "Don't talk of love, show me." And the song ends with her belting out, "Show me now." The Gospel writers are telling us that Jesus is doing just that. He's showing us the glory of God and not just talking about it. Today's story is about the casting out of an evil spirit, and it's to show that God, through Jesus, opposes the evil of the world. If there is evil or bad in the world, then we should expect it to oppose all that is good. Evil and goodness can't really exist side by side. One overcomes the other. In the baptism service, the priest asks this question of the person to be baptized: do you reject the devil and all rebellion against God? When it's a child being christened, the question is asked of the parents and godparents. And I always try to explain this by saying that I don't believe in a devil who wears red tights, stokes the fires of hell and carries a pitchfork. But I do believe that there is evil in our world. The example which I very often give are the bombings which have happened all too frequently around our world, in London and Manchester, Paris, New York, and all those other places. And that when this happens, it looks as though bad and evil have overcome the good of our world. However, whenever people light candles, hold a concert, bring flowers, and walk through the streets in peace, the evil of our world becomes overwhelmed by the good of our world. And so the power of God conquers. There is a lot of bad in our world. To see this, we only need to watch the news or to open a history book. It has been like this since human beings first walked on the earth. The early stories of Genesis are there to show just how willful we are. There are things in the world which we do not understand and perhaps never will do. And this has been thought about and reflected over for hundreds and thousands of years. One of my favourite books of the Old Testament is Ecclesiastes. The writer is a poet and a teacher, and there is that famous passage which begins chapter 3. For everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. The writer is saying that this is how life is, that everything has an opposite, that it is impossible to have life without death, that it is impossible to know happiness without sorrow. And he says, this, he says, is life. Coupled with the way that life is, in order for it to exist, are those things which we do to one another, which make life harder to live. The wars, the selfishness, the power struggles, which leave many hurt, and which we directly cause. I read an article this week by John Humphreys, the journalist and broadcaster. I think he's quite anti-religion, although I think he will probably call himself an agnostic rather than an atheist. In this article, he said that whilst he was watching the siege in one of the Russian states, the one that happened in a school where there were children held hostage, and where many were shot and killed by terrorists, that he asked himself, if there is a God, why did God not intervene in something terrible like this? Now, I think he had Rowan Williams sat next to him, who was then Archbishop of Canterbury, and I've no idea how Rowan answered that. I know there was a lot of silence, and silence is important. But I would answer it like this, that God was there. God was there in that terrible tragedy. God was there in the very midst of the massacre, there with the victims and there with those who survived, there with them in all their sorrow, and most of all, I believe that the only response that can come out of it is this, that God did intervene. God has intervened. He did so 2,000 years ago, and because he intervened, he was crucified by the very people he created the world for. In this gospel story today about the cleansing of the evil spirits, God, through Jesus, is intervening, because by casting out this evil spirit from this man, this demon, whatever it is, he's showing that there is a way to overcome the complexities, the badness of life, to stop and to deal with it. Badness, evil, is not passive. It is resourceful and it is cunning, but it can be held at bay and it can be stopped. As you possibly know, it is said that if the whole of the creation of our world were to be compressed into one single year, then human beings stood upright just before midnight on the last day, the 31st of December. We think that we're so clever. We think as human beings that we've come so far, and we have. And yet when you look at the scale of things, when you look up at the cloudless night, on a cloudless night into the stars, it's only then that you begin to realise just how very small and insignificant we are. We think we know so much, and we do, but in the great scheme of things, we know virtually nothing. As we reach out further into the unknown, we find that things become even more complex. The more questions science answers, the more questions those answers pose. I believe that God gave us this world and everything in it, and he has given life abundantly. I came that you may have life and have it abundantly, says Jesus. Isn't that a wonderful sentence? I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. Life involves living. It is impossible to know and to understand everything. If we did, we would be God. That is why God gave us Jesus, to show us a way that we could live our lives more fully, more abundantly. Think of light and the many lights we use. Electric lights, candles, torches, lasers, x-rays, security lights. Lights help us to see things more clearly. The greatest light we have is, of course, the sun. Without the sun, there is no life. We rely on it for our food, our warmth and energy. We need it to light our way. We can feel its warmth, we can see its beauty, and yet we cannot look directly at it. And very often we cannot stay in its light without protection. In exactly the same way, it is impossible for us to comprehend the full glory of God. But through Jesus, we can see what God wants for us and how he would like his creation to be, and the part that all human beings have in making sure that all life is lived as God wanted it to be lived, abundantly.